If you've seen the 2016 horror movie Split, you'll probably recognize James McAvoy's mind-bending performance as the murderous villain Kevin Wendell Crumb, or the Beast, who can switch between 24 different personalities with ease. Not to mention performing all sorts of extraordinary feats like climbing walls and bending metal. What you'd be surprised to learn is that the movie isn't as far removed from reality as you might think. There are a select few individuals out there who are just like McAvoy's character. Of course, what I mean is that they have multiple identities, not that they're tyrannical superhumans. Don't believe me? Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the life of a woman who has over 2,500 different personalities living within her. 49-year-old Jenny Haynes. As you might expect, someone doesn't just develop such an astounding assortment of identities overnight. Jenny Haynes did not have a normal childhood by any stretch of the imagination, and it's this gruesome chapter of her life which caused her fundamental understanding of the word personality to become extraordinarily fragmented. In 1974, the Haynes family, consisting of 4-year-old Jenny and her 2 siblings, her mother Pat and her father Richard Haynes, moved from Bexley Heath in London to the western suburb of Greenacre in Sydney, Australia. It was then that Jenny's life took a dark turn, as her father began a pattern of regular sexual and physical abuse within the family home, crucially hidden away from the protective watch of Jenny's mother. In order to continue his tirade of sickening abuse, Richard was also able to convince his young and impressionable daughter that he could read her mind. As a result, Jenny believed that if she so much as thought about her suffering, her father would find out and punish the rest of her family. Unable to properly process what was happening to her, Jenny started to compose her thoughts into song lyrics in a bid to encrypt them from her abuser. When reflecting on her ordeal, for example, her thoughts might take the form of the famous Culture Club lyrics, "Do you really want to hurt me? Do you really want to make me cry?" It was an ingenious tactic, but this was just the beginning of the amazing way Jenny's mind would adapt itself to help her cope with her horrific home life. Richard's abuse continued until 1981, when Jenny turned 11. By this point, the family had moved back to the UK, and in 1984, Jenny's mother Pat, who still knew nothing about her husband's vile campaign, divorced Richard. By the time Jenny's ordeal was over, she had suffered irreparable damage to her eyesight, jaw, bowel, anus, and coccyx. Her abuse was so extreme and persistent that Australian police would later describe it as one of the worst child abuse cases in the country's history. It would be decades before Jenny would get any real justice for her suffering, but her mind had created an extraordinary tactic to detach itself and shield her from total psychological damage. Although her father was clearly directing his violence upon his daughter, it wasn't actually Jennifer Haynes, in her most basic form, who he was abusing. Instead, Jenny has since explained that a second personality emerged from within her mind to withstand the ordeal, a 4-year-old girl named Symphony. During these periods of abuse, Symphony would step forward into Jenny's consciousness and endure the abuse for her. Jenny will be forever grateful for Symphony's sacrifice, explaining that it was Symphony who my father suppressed. Although Jenny is now almost 50, Symphony has remained in this permanent childlike state ever since. To this day, Jenny can call upon any of her given personalities to communicate through her. And as far as she's concerned, Jennifer Haynes is as much of an alternate identity as any of the others.
If he thinks that anything he does now is going to impact on me, it's my life now.
It's not uncommon for children to fabricate imaginary friends who they will eventually grow out of or simply forget about. But this was different. Symphony was Jenny, and Jenny was Symphony. In fact, Symphony was just the first of an entire army of strangers who emerged to protect Jenny when she needed them the most. By the time Richard's abuse had finally subsided, Jenny estimated that there were around 2,500 different personalities living inside her at once. At the time, though, she didn't think this was unusual. Thanks to her depraved upbringing, it was her understanding that everyone had different competing voices inside their head. Although Jenny's complete roster of identities is too extensive to recount in full, she has since opened up about a few of the other colorful characters who saved her life during such a dark time. One of the first personalities to follow in Symphony's footsteps was a man named Eric, who Jenny has called an organizer because he built the landscape where her personalities would live, as well as setting out the ground rules for them to follow. The next was an 11-year-old boy named Judas. Jenny describes him as short with red hair, wearing plain gray school trousers and a bright green jumper. Much like his namesake, Judas was the keenest to tell someone about what was happening, and he always looks like he is just about to speak. On January 13, 1977, a 17, now 18-year-old boy named Muscles was generated. This teenage motorcycle-loving lout styles himself after singer-songwriter Billy Idol and is the nurturing protector of the group. Jenny also joked that Muscles refused to turn 18 for some time because he could then get a gun license to shoot her father.
Sorry, I'm Symphony. I wanted to talk to him. I wanted to tell him exactly what I thought. Although I didn't expect Muscles to jump out and call him a bastard. But that's better than the other word he wanted to use.
Among the others are Linda, or Maggot, a tall, slender woman wearing a 1950s skirt with pink poodle appliques and her hair up in an elegant bun. And little Ricky. This 8-year-old boy who wears a gray suit had the difficult decision of choosing which personality would face Richard by tapping them on the shoulder and saying, "You're up." Meanwhile, Volcano, a tall, bleach blonde leather-clad stud, played another vital role in the group's survival as he encouraged each personality not to suppress their emotions, but feel them to their fullest. When Jenny first reached out to the police for help in 2009, she worried that she wouldn't be taken seriously after being turned away by countless counselors in the past. Although she now understood that her sense of identity was indeed something extraordinary, she had also learned that she wasn't alone. From the moment she first created Symphony, she had developed a condition known as Dissociative Identity Disorder, or DID, which affects around 0.5 to 2% of the world's population. This complicated condition occurs during childhood, usually before the age of 8, and is generally a direct result of severe childhood trauma, abuse, and neglect with no other adult protection. Generally, people with DID can generate an average of 10 to 15 personalities, making Jenny's case truly mind-blowing. For some time, DID was even met with skepticism and disbelief in the field of psychology, but it has since been recognized as a prime example of how the human mind can adapt itself to help us survive. In fact, Jenny's own psychiatrist of 20 years, Dr. George Blair West, has explained that DID is now not only considered a genuine medical condition, but an ingenious one too. By splitting parts of her own mind into multiple personalities or alters, Jenny Haynes was able to endure and overcome her terrifying ordeal by calling on different protectors, which each played important roles in containing different elements of the abuse. Astonishingly, some of her alters were even able to manage Jenny's senses, such as controlling her olfactory system or sense of smell, so that she could block out the triggering stench of her father. DID is essentially a sophisticated coping mechanism that exists entirely within the mind, which means there is no miracle cure for the condition, although talking therapies are usually recommended. Because Jenny's own sense of personality has become so fragmented over the years, abandoning her alters and returning to a singular existence as Jennifer Haynes is no longer an option. As she has since said herself, "They came out of the back of my head. I don't know how to put them back in." This is essentially what happens in Split, as James McAvoy's character Kevin struggles to contain the 24 different personalities which he developed during a childhood of abuse from his mother and an absent father. However, director M. Night Shyamalan has also faced criticism from the community of people who actually suffer from DID for perpetuating the damaging idea that those with split personalities are unpredictable and violent, something which is almost never the case in real life. In preparation for the role, McAvoy also claimed he wasn't actually able to speak to someone with DID, so he spent some time with medical professionals and watched some DID YouTube diaries instead. Soon after the movie's release, a petition circulated online which encouraged the actors to acknowledge the wrongfully villainous stigma of DID, while another, which amassed over 20,000 signatures, called for a total boycott of the film. In Jenny's case, it is plain to see that DID is not only a harmless condition, but a necessary means of survival. Without her personalities to protect her, Jenny wouldn't have been strong enough to speak out about her ordeal years later. Jenny prepared an emotional document from the perspective of some of her many personalities, who each recounted the abuse in incredible detail, and handed it to Sydney Detective Sergeant Paul Stamoulis, one of the first law enforcers to believe her story. In February 2017, Richard Haynes, now 74, was extradited from Darlington in England to face dozens of charges of assault against his daughter Jennifer throughout the 1970s and 80s. After years of tireless preparation, all that was left was for Jenny to gather together her own psychological army and prepare to go to war. Little did she know, the trial that would later take place was about to change history.
We will tell, and we will put you in a courtroom, and we will testify against you, and you will go to jail.
On the 21st of February 2019, Jenny finally took the stand to testify against her father. But she wasn't alone. The landmark trial is believed to be the first case in Australia, and possibly the world, where a victim with diagnosed dissociative identity disorder has testified through multiple personalities and been able to secure a conviction. As a victim of childhood sexual abuse, she was entitled to anonymity, but waived her right so that the world could know the name of her abuser. Prior to the trial, Jenny's personalities had discussed at length which role each one would take in recounting the ordeal. Symphony, who intended to use the trial to grow up, would stand first and relive in excruciating detail the several years of abuse. Afterwards, Muscles would give evidence of physical abuse, while Linda would testify on the impact on Jenny's schooling and personal relationships. About 2.5 hours into the trial, however, something unexpected happened. After listening to Symphony's account of the abuse through 1974, Richard Haynes crumbled and changed his plea. He pleaded guilty to 25 of the worst charges against him, while dozens more were counted towards his sentencing. In total, Haynes faced 367 individual charges, all of which Jenny would have provided detailed evidence for thanks to the memories maintained by her identities, which may have otherwise been lost to trauma. On September 6th, Richard Haynes was sentenced to 45 years in jail with a non-parole of 33 years by District Court Judge Sarah Huggett, the longest sentence handed to a child abuser in Australia.
I am stunned. I'm thrilled that my father finally owned up.
Jenny Haynes emerged from the courtroom that day ecstatic with the outcome. After decades of waiting, she'd finally won her life back, and her abuser would surely die in jail. Since learning of the abuse, Jenny's mother has also become her closest supporter and celebrated by her side. At the end of the trial, Jenny said, "Every one of my altars, every person inside, the war is over. We won. Stand down." But she knows she could never have done it without them. Dr. Pam Stavropoulos, a childhood trauma expert, has recognized Jenny's case as being instrumental in bringing wider awareness of a challenging condition which so often generates disbelief and discomfort. Although Jenny makes no mistake that living with 2,500 competing voices inside your head can be hard at times, she knows that she would never be the same without them. Her monstrous father might be the reason they exist to begin with, but Jenny's altars are the ones who ultimately helped her defeat him. For someone who had suffered so long in silence, Jenny Haynes can finally feel validated by the fact that her identities are no longer dismissed as a mental illness or simply pretending to be someone else. As she has said herself, "You're protecting yourself. You're protecting your soul." Most importantly, her story is living proof that a diagnosis like dissociative identity disorder doesn't have to stand in the way of justice. In the end, goodwill always triumphs over evil, no matter how complicated the case. What do you make of Jenny Haynes' extraordinary story? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.